Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers and sisters, welcome to another video. You'll never guess who's back. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's the prostate. Play it.
When I was religious, I also thought there was something good about being sick and going on. It was kind of a pious thing. And Allah would be proud of me. Of course, not as proud as he would be if I went out to wage war and gather some sex slaves. Anyways.
Yep, and that's what you call poison the well fallacy. Let's move on.
Today I want to talk about the Muslim sleepers. No, I'm not talking about the amazing inefficiency of the sleeping Muslim world. And I'm also not talking about the virgins that you can sleep with in heaven, as tempting as it may sound to some primitive men.
Poison the well fallacy again. Let's move on.
They all slept at once, and once they woke up, they started asking each other how long they slept, and they all thought it was just a few hours. But they felt very hungry, so they decided that one of them should go back to the city to buy some food. Why he goes back to the city that they just saved their lives from just for food is beyond me. Don't ask me.
Have you ever actually thought of the fact that they were starving to death? They had to eat, AP. There was no other way for them to get food. The story is going to elaborate later on that they slept for 300 or 309 years. Whether they're conscious of that or not doesn't matter. It's going to make them hungry in proportion to that length of time. On top of that, the ayat of the surah say this in ayah 19. And similarly, we awakened them that they might question one another, said a speaker from among them. How long have you remained here? They said, we have remained a day or a part of a day. They said, your Lord is most knowing of how long you remained. So send one of you with this silver coin of yours to the city, and let him look to which is the best of food, and bring you provision from it, and let him be cautious, and let no one be aware of you. Indeed, if they come to know of you, they will stone you, or return you to their religion, and never would you succeed then ever. So what we can see from this passage in the Quran is that the men were aware of the danger of going back to the city. So yeah, AP, this is elaborated in the surah. They're very well aware of what's going on. The fact is simply that they need food, and there's no other way for them to get food for the 7 of them. I mean, what are you going to say? For them that they should have hunted some animals in the nearby fields or something like that? That's not really easy when it comes to feeding 7 people, AP. This was more practical for them to for one of them to go to the city disguised in some kind of way so that he avoids people figuring him out. Simple as that. But you don't get it, do you?
Coming to Islam, this gets very bad for Islam. What seems to have happened here, why the Quran adopted this story, is that Christians in Muhammad's environment probably told Muhammad about this story. The Christians who told Muhammad about the 7 sleepers apparently didn't know about the number of the young men, which is why the Quran says that they were 3 or 5 or 7, and they had a dog. Suddenly there is a dog. And that Allah knows best about their number, and few people know. For some interesting reason, the all-knowing Allah doesn't tell us about the exact number of the people, despite the fact that the written sources clearly say they were 7. But those people who talked to Muhammad probably didn't know. It just looks like someone has just heard this story, with conflicting numbers, and that someone is not really sure what to say about it.
So to keep it short, AP appeals to the Christian narrative of the story, which says that there were 7 sleepers of the cave. He says that the Quran does not give us that detail and therefore is lacking in knowledge of what happened. But this is simply not the case. The Quran is not negating that there were 7 sleepers of the cave. It's simply saying that people around Arabia during the time of the Prophet ﷺ were arguing about them being 3, 5, and 6. And this is why it says in the ayah, سَيَقُولُونَ ثَلَاثَةٌ رَابِعُهُمْ كَلْبُهُمْ وَيَقُولُونَ خَمْسَةٌ سَادِسُهُمْ كَلْبُهُمْ. They're going to say there were 3, the 4th of them being their dog, and they will say there were 5, the 6th of them being their dog, guessing at the unseen, and they will say there were 7, and the 8th of them was their dog. This is how it's described in the ayah. But there are multiple points to be made here in regards to the rhetoric of the Quran and the main intention behind mentioning this detail. First of all, one of the points of this portion of the surah is to teach people to not look at unnecessary detail, because people were arguing about the number of the people in the cave. They were arguing about the color of the dog that they had. They were arguing about where the cave was, but they were missing the main point, which is the portion of the resurrection, of the fact that they were resurrected from death back into life. in a kind of figurative sense, because they were resurrected they were given a 300-year or 309-year-old long sleep. So the main point of the story is to teach people that they shouldn't look at these details, because it says later on in the ayah, "Say, my Lord is most knowing of their number. None knows them except a few. So do not argue about them except with an obvious argument, and do not inquire about them among the speculators from anyone." On top of that, our scholars did point out that from a balagha point of view, from a rhetoric point of view, the two sentences that mention them being as 3 and 5 are mentioned before the clause that says guessing at the unseen. And then the sentence about them being 7 is mentioned afterwards, which means that implicitly the ones that are mentioning that there were 7, the 8th of them being their dog, are not included in the category of those who are denied by the clause guessing at the unseen. So there's a good reason for us, due to the type of sequencing that's going on in the ayah, to accept the idea that there were 7. So Ridwan's argument fails, as usual, from multiple points of view.
Leaving aside the fact that this section of the Quran is very poorly written for an informational text, and very agonizingly incoherent, because the Quran is written in impractical Arabian poetry, the Quran actually makes a mistake in telling this story. It tells us that the people in the time of the 7 sleepers took deities besides Allah. This is a dominant Quranic reference to the Arab polytheists and to Christians, who, according to Islam, believed in Allah but also in other gods. They take gods besides Allah. But Romans didn't take gods besides the one God. Romans believed in the Roman gods and didn't have the one God at all. But Muhammad didn't know that, of course.
So what Ridwan basically does here is show us how ignorant he is of linguistics and Arabic language in particular. He says that in the verse that says, هَؤُلَاءِ قَوْمٌ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ آلِهَةً, these people of ours have taken besides him, or from besides him, gods. That due to this segment of the verse, it is implied that the Romans worshipped God and other gods along with him, because of the prepositional phrase min duni, which means from besides. This is simply not the case, though, because the proper prepositional phrase that we would use in English and a similar preposition that we would use in Arabic would be along with, which in Arabic would be ma, which just means with. I'll give you an example. So in Surah 15, verse number 96, it says, الَّذِينَ يَجْعَلُونَ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ فَسَوْفَ يَعْلَمُونَ, which means, and those who set up with God another deity or another god, they will get to know. So if we wanted to say that somebody worships something with God and worships God as well, we would use ma and not min duni. Min duni would imply that they don't worship God, that they worship something besides him. Although it doesn't have to be the case, it's not necessary that they worship God along with the gods that they worship besides God, if the prepositional phrase min duni is used. It's simply not necessitated due to the nature of the language itself. And I'll give you an easier example to understand this. So if I wanted to say that let's say I have 2 sentences describing a similar situation. I wanted to say that I drank juice with milk. I would say sharibtul asira ma'a al-halib. I drank the juice with milk. Along with milk. If I wanted to say I drank the juice instead of the milk, i.e. I didn't drink the milk has nothing to do with me, I would say sharibtul asira duna al-halibi, or min dun al-halibi, if we wanted to use the Quranic language. So yeah, basically Ridwan shows to us how ignorant he is of language. I'm sorry, that's just the case, Ridwan. Let's go on.
He barely understood Christianity and Judaism. Speaking of the belief in God, the Quran's adoption of this story is actually an own goal for Islam. Islam rejects Christianity as a perverted belief. It condemns the cross, promises hell for those who believe that Jesus is God and the Son of God, and orders to subjugate Christians until they accept Islam. In the actual story of the 7 sleepers, however, God makes these young men sleep. Then he wakes them up and shows them to the people as a miracle. And what the young men see as they go to the city of Ephesus is crosses. Crosses at every entrance of the city. They are happy that people now worship the one true God. And the Emperor Theodosius II, who is a Nicene Christian who believes in the Trinity, comes and prays together with them to Jesus. If this story is true, then Allah actually shows a miracle and makes these people together rejoice in a belief and a form of prayer that the Quran later strictly rejects and condemns and promises eternal hellfire for. What the hell, Muslims?
How is this consistent in any way, Ridwan? Throughout the video, you deny the Christian narrative. I mean, you deny the story overall, but you give reasons as to why the Christian narrative of the story should be negated itself. You say that Theseus has no reason to visit the 7 people in the cave. Let's listen.
Why doesn't Allah just tell us the number? We find the number in secondary sources. Further, the Quran doesn't tell us anything about these young men, such as why they fled, where they lived, in what land they were, in what time they lived, who ruled over them. All these details are known in written stories. It doesn't tell us their names either, although we know their names from Christian sources. If you want my honest opinion about this story, I think it is complete nonsense. But that's just me. I have so many issues with it. Like, why would Emperor Decius deal so strictly and specifically with some 7 men from Ephesus, and even shut the entrance of a cave on them, instead of just imprisoning them like he did with all the other Christians?
And so my response to you is, how come this doesn't apply to Theodosius? Why would Theodosius respond to something that is most probably going to be considered a rumor by him? Because these stories of long sleepers were famous in previous traditions. Even the Greeks had them. Aristotle mentions things like this in his book on physics. Long sleepers are stories that were circulated by many people. Now, this per se doesn't mean that the story of a long sleeper is impossible. It simply means that an emperor such as Theodosius will have no reason to listen to that story and go himself to affirm something. And the good thing is the Quran doesn't mention emperors. So this idea of emperors coming to check the stones, to check the cave sleepers is absurd, and I agree. But you can't just use it now to disprove the Quran, assuming that we should assume that the story is true in order to say that the Quran is contradicting reality. This is not the case. You have a bad understanding of what it means to be a historical defeater. Now let me elaborate on that. Had it not been the case that the Quran was revealed, I would not have believed in the story myself. But the thing is, when we have a good argument for the Quran being a revelation from God, being something that is revealed to a prophet who points to miracles around him that are occurring to approve of his prophethood in relation to God who is sending him, this means that the text that God reveals is a manifestation of God's speech, and when God speaks about history, he's completely accurate because God knows all of history, and his speech would be the ultimate historical defeater for any previous fact. There's also an implicit fallacy that you're committing here, Ridwan. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. The idea that because X event precedes Y event, therefore Y event must be caused by X event. This is not the case. You're saying that the narrative given by the Christians precedes the Quranic narrative, and therefore the narrative of the Christians has to construct the narrative of the Quran. But this is really ridiculous. It would be quite ridiculous to claim that all of these stories are just simple appeals to the Christians and the Jews. No, they serve as stories that God reveals that are either affirmed, that are either affirmations of certain elements of other narratives in history or negations of certain narratives that occur in history. They serve as part of the historical defeater, which is the miracle of the Quran being revealed on Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And this discussion should be on a much higher intellectual level on whether the Prophet ﷺ is a prophet of God or not. Using arguments like this is basically the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, Ridwan, and it's not going to work. Jazakumullah khairan for watching the video, and until next time, guys. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.